Hello BookTube, welcome back to my 2025 library tour. In this episode, more history, the second shelf on this bookcase here. The first few books are American history, and then we get some German history and World War One before wrapping up with popular culture. First up is Outside the Gates of Eden, The Dream of America from Hiroshima to Now by Peter Bacon Hills. This is a history that looks at American history through the lens of elements of popular culture. It's not very good. I tried it last year for a reading project or something, and I did not like it at all. It needs to go. I haven't gotten around to The Lost Promise, American Universities in the 1960s by Alan Schrecker. So this is a study of American universities. Nor have I read That's the Way It Is, A History of Television News in America by Charles L. Ponce de Leon. How the Word is Passed, A Reckoning with the History of Slavery Across America by Clint Smith. So this is a history that looks at American slavery and its after effects by looking at various locations throughout the United States, mostly in the American South, but also New York City and also Accra in Ghana. And how those locations is their relationship to slavery and the after effects of that. Very good book. Darkness Falling by The Strange Death of the Weimar Republic, 1930 to 1933, by Peter Walther. I have not gotten to this yet. The Coming of the Third Reich by Richard J. Evans. This is the first book in a trilogy that looks at the history of Nazi Germany from its beginnings with the coming of the Third Reich through to the Third Reich in power and the Third Reich at war, of which I don't have any of those volumes. I also have a 2-volume history that covers the same period by Frank McDonough, The Hitler Years, Triumph 1933 to 1939. And Disaster 1940 to 1945. Culture in the Third Reich by Moritz Vollmer. So this is a study of culture in the Third Reich and how the Nazis took over the levers of artistic production in film, art, theater, radio, literature, you name it. In Hitler's Munich, Jews, the Revolution, and the Rise of Nazism by Michael Brenner. So this is a study of Munich in the 1930s, and it features how Munich became the holy city of Nazism. Really good book. I think I reviewed it for Open Letters when it came out. I also have a 2-volume biography of Hitler by Volker Ulrich, Ascent, 1889 to 1939. And Downfall, 1939 to 1945. moving away from the Nazis, I also have Aftermath, Life in the Fallout of the Third Reich, 1945 to 1955, by Harold Heoner. So this is a rather curious history of post-World War II Germany. It was a bit difficult to read, but glad I read it. It was on the short list for the Kindle History Prize a few years ago. Beyond the Wall, a history of East Germany by Katja Hoyer. So this is a history of the German Democratic Republic, or East Germany. Have not gotten to this yet. The Global Age, Europe 1950 to 2017 by Ian Kershaw. So this is a big history of Europe post-World War II. It's been a while since I had a go at this. Revolutionary Spring, Europe Aflame and the Fight for a New World, 1848 to 1849, by Christopher Clark. So this is a history of the revolutions of 1848, their origins, their progress, and their ultimate suppressions. Did not particularly get on with this book. The Brow Tower, a portrait of the world before the war, 1890 to 1914, by Barbara W. Tuchman. So this is the history of the late 19th and very early 20th centuries. It's been a very long time since I read this, and I quite liked it, which is why I added it to my collection. The Sleepwalkers, How Europe Went to War in 1914 by Christopher Clark. So this is a interesting history of the origins of World War I. Very good. And it equally passes the blame amongst many actors. Looking at the other side of the war, this is Paris 1919. 6 Months That Changed the World by Margaret Macmillan. Have not gotten to this yet. And I have The First World War by John Keegan in this naked hardcover. I've had this for a number of years. I think I picked it up from my university library. At the time, every year, they would discard some books, and I guess other people could just donate books, and they'd end up just being placed out front of the library and like kind of sell carts. And I don't think they actually, I don't remember if they were on sale or they were just, if you wanted to take them, but if they were library discards, go into the library to make sure they were de-accessed. Dreadnought, Britain, Germany, and the Coming of the Great War by Robert K. Massey. So this is a history of the naval arms race between Britain and Germany in the lead up to World War I. Have not gotten around to this yet. Thinking about reading it in October, November, or December. The Enlightenment, The Pursuit of Happiness, 1680 to 1790 by Richie Robertson. So this is a history of the Enlightenment that looks at it from various different subjects, I believe. It's been quite a few years since I tried it. I made it about a third of the way through, maybe almost half of the way through, before I gave up. It just didn't really work out for me. American Comics, a history by Jeremy Dauber. So this is a history of American comics. It starts with the comic strips that used to appear in major newspapers, and wraps up with American comic books. Most, to a certain extent, mostly the superhero comics published by Marvel and DC, but it also looks at indie comics, both from publishers like Image or even self-published comics and more avant-garde comics, that sort of thing. Quite liked it. Although I think after a certain point the comic strips got the short end of the stick. And finally, Sunny Days, the children's television revolution that changed America by David Camp. So this is a history of children's television in the late 60s and into the 70s that focuses on educational children's television. So Sesame Street, Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, The Electric Company, Zoom, which were all on PBS. And were on PBS for decades or periodically came back in the case of The Electric Company and Zoom, which was, I think, first in the 70s, and then there's a brief revival in the early 2000s. And then I think the same thing happened with The Electric Company. And of course, Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood and Sesame Street lasted for decades. Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood lasting until around 2000. And Sesame Street still continuing to this day, although in a much reduced state. But the book also looks at the Schoolhouse Rock, which was a more commercial venture. There's also some coverage of an album and also local children's educational programming in New York and Los Angeles. I read this book several years ago, and it was one of my favorites of that year. But I did try to reread it in December, and that did not go well, annoyingly. So, that was that shelf. I will be back tomorrow with this shelf, which will feature more German history, although this time pre-20th century German history. Although, nope. We'll actually end it, well, no. Actually, the whole shelf is mostly Austria, Germany, except for the little ends. But anyway, we'll get to them tomorrow. So until then, thank you, BookTube. Have a great afternoon and stay safe.